Order, and a very warm welcome, Secretary of State Liz Kendall, to this public session of the Work and Pensions Select Committee, and delighted to welcome you, but also the Permanent Secretary, Sir Peter Schofield. We're all going to take it in turns to ask some questions, hopefully not too grueling, but certainly probing questions for you. And we're very aware that this is your first Select Committee meeting, so very honoured to have you with us. I'm going to kick off, if that's okay. I just wondered if you could enlighten us, really, following the Social Security Advisory Committee letter to you in September. I know that there was an equality impact assessment that was undertaken, but I wonder if you were in a position to say whether you will be doing what they recommended, which was a more detailed impact assessment in relation to the winter fuel payment decision.
Well, thank you, and it's a real pleasure and honour to be here today, and I know the excellent work the committee has done and I believe will continue to do, and I really look forward to working with you in a spirit of openness, honesty, and above all, accountability to Parliament and to the public. So it really is a great honour to be here today. So yes, the Social Security Advisory Committee did write to us about the impact of means testing the winter fuel payment, which, as you know, a decision that was taken by the Chancellor in order to deal with the big gap that we face in the public finances, £22 billion this year, and also to make sure that when times are tough and money is tight, that we focus support on those in greatest need. And we did publish an equality analysis. That's not normally done for secondary legislation, but we did feel it was important to do that and to publish that so that people could see that analysis. I am particularly concerned about the impact on the very, very poorest pensioners who are not claiming the pension credit they're entitled to, so they miss out on up to £3,900 a year of pension credit, but also winter fuel payment. And we will be publishing more statistics about claims, how many of those claims are successful later on this month. And I want to try and be as open as possible with the committee and the public about the impacts and what we're doing to mitigate them. You'll know there was an urgent question yesterday in the House of Commons. We have my honourable friend, the Minister for Pensions, has also published numerous parliamentary answers around a whole host of issues about the impact that this is having. And I am really, really focused, above all, on making sure the very poorest pensioners don't lose out.
Thank you. Very grateful to you for that response. I wondered, given that we know that cold has a particular impact on older people, but also in terms of vulnerable people, particularly disabled people who may not be so mobile, and so keeping warm is a particular issue. I wondered if you have been working with the Department for Health and Social Care on the impacts that the changes to winter fuel payment to still poor pensioners who are just outside the pension credit threshold, what the impacts may be on them, what the impact also might be on our health and social care system as well.
Yes, I have been working with the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, on this issue, because we know that if you're an older or disabled person, maybe with 2 or more chronic conditions, at home, less mobile, with greater need for heating, that's a really, really important issue. So we've been working with him to ensure that frontline NHS staff, district and community nurses who may be visiting people at home are able to signpost people to the right help and support, not just so that they can get the pension credit and winter fuel payment they're entitled to, but we also know that the warm home discount, £150 a year, has a really important role to play. But because of our new pension credit take-up campaign, something we've been working really, really hard on, we have also seen some brilliant work by GPs, for example, GP practices in Merseyside. We know two of them, one in Kensington there, has sent over 500 text messages to patients, encouraging them to claim, and in Prince's Park, over 770 text messages. We're also working with local authorities. It's a really concerning issue that over 800,000 pensioners are not claiming pension credit, and therefore they also won't get the winter fuel payment. We have got to find a way to tackle this problem, which, as you know, has been there for many, many years. I'm very happy to talk more about what we're going to do in the long term to solve the problem, but the issues of the health needs of older and disabled pensioners is something that I and the Health Secretary have been focused on.
Thank you, very grateful to you. One final one for me before I hand over to my colleagues here. In terms of the pensions review that is underway at the moment, I wondered how the next phase of that might be considering pensioner poverty and particularly looking at pensions adequacy, the support, other forms of support other than pension credit and so on when that comes around. Is that something you're considering?
Yeah, well, we've got two phases of this review. The first one very much focusing on how reforms to the pension system to ensure greater investment in UK PLC. But the second stage of the review will be looking at future outcomes, including pension adequacy, as well as further investment in UK markets. I mean, I think this is to tell a sort of broad story here. When we were last in government, there was a real focus on driving down pensioner poverty. That was the big challenge. Then we had the Turner Review, a longer-term review into pensions, which paved the way for auto-enrolment, which benefited 10 million low-income workers by auto-enrolling them in the system, and that was something that was then carried on and implemented by the last government. But we know that in future that there are real challenges around pensioner poverty coming down the tracks again, because not enough people are in the system, they aren't saving enough. Too many people, younger people today, we obviously want to change this, but are paying huge amounts in rent, can't get on the housing ladder, and if they haven't paid off their mortgages, they will have, they'll be using their state pension to do that. So this is a long-term look that we need to take to make sure that even though pensioner poverty, there's still significant problems, but it's much less than it was when we were last in government. Indeed. We have got to tackle that.
Thank you, Secretary. So over to my colleague John Mill.
Thank you. You've talked about the need to protect vulnerable groups who may lose out from the removal of winter fuel payment. And there's been a lot of focus on the pension credit element and those trying to get all those people that are not claiming it. But they're not the only groups. There's a much wider group of people that are potentially losing out here. Age UK estimate that 2.5 million people on or just above the poverty line will also lose the payment. We're also excluding an unknown number of people with a long-term health condition or disability. And of course, everyone's losing the cost of living uplift that was there last year of £300. So putting all those together, that's a lot of groups where I'm not really clear what you're doing to mitigate them.
Well, I'd start first, last and always with our commitment to the pension triple lock, which will see the basic state pension increase by over £360 next April, the new state pension increase by £470 a year next April. Over the course of the Parliament, it will see over 30 billion extra spending in the state pension. That is the absolute bedrock of our commitment to pensioners, a significant commitment that we are fulfilling from this government. Secondly, I would say that it's not just the what we're doing to increase pension credit take-up. And I will say that we are actually the long call for merger of housing benefit and pension credit. We are actually going to be bringing that forward for new claims from the next year. It was first promised, you'll know, in 2011 by the last government, and we're actually making much, much greater progress already on that. I would also say that we have the Warm Homes discount, which isn't of £150. That's not just available to pensioners on pension credit, but those on low incomes with high housing costs. We are also working with the energy companies to see what more they can do to support people. Companies like Octopus are already providing extra support. And in the longer term, our commitment to insulating 5 million homes over the course of this Parliament. I know that will take time. I'm not saying that will happen straight away, but we are making progress on that. And I think that package of support together does look at those maybe just above the pension credit level who maybe have some small savings but are still struggling. And I would just say, last but not least, our commitment to the Household Support Fund. We already committed £500 million, including Barnett consequentions. The budget announced another £1 billion for that. And in my own constituency, this is why I'm quite obsessed about pension credit uptake and those just above the line. Because of how we were running our household support fund in Leicester, we discovered a lot of pensioners not on the pension credit they're entitled to, but those just above who are missing out. And the household support fund can be used for those pensioners too. That's a really important message. We've done that in Leicester, and I would just urge anybody listening to make sure they work with their council to ensure that big lot of funding is available for those just above the pension credit level.
The very supportive that you're maintaining the triple lock. That's fantastic news. However, the uplift there is really that's for everyone, and it's about it's caused by high inflation. So it's not
actually the 4.1. Well, I mean, as you know, the pension triple lock is there's 3 elements that we're looking at, and it is for everybody. But it will mean that over the course of the Parliament, those on the new state pension, it's estimated will see a £1,900 increase in the new state pension. That is a significant commitment to all pensioners, but with that extra targeted support on the very poorest and some additional support for those just above the pension credit level. Now, that's this government's approach. Help for all pensioners with targeted support for the poorest. We may have differences of opinion about what's the best way to spend that money, but that's this government's approach. And I hope that we will see some significant improvements in pension credit take-up, but also in making people's homes more energy efficient, because ultimately you put the money in, but if it's going out the windows and out the roof, it's not going to help anyone. So you've got to have that long-term plan on energy efficiency in housing, as well as the upfront support into people's pockets.
Just on the point on inflation, obviously the committee will know this, but CPI inflation was 1.7, so the triple lock being connected to average earnings in this case gave pensioners a significant increase compared to what was offered to those on other benefits.
Well, I agree, and I'm very supportive of it. However, that is intended to cover. There's nothing specific in it in that for pensioners losing out on winter fuel. So it's a general payment that's considered necessary for everyone. So in terms of targeting, either with that or any of the other benefits or mechanisms you're mentioning, they're not targeted. They were there already. They were not new targeted.
Pension credit is. The Warm Homes discount
is. But it's not new.
Energy insulating people's homes, starting on the very poorest. We're also actually consulting on right now on how energy efficiency in social housing and the private rented sector. So we have got targeted support on the very poorest and on low-income households, as well as the flat rate increase for everyone, which is significant because of the triple lock. So I perhaps don't agree with the premise of the question that there isn't targeted support on those who need it most.
It's not targeted. It was targeted in the same way as before. It's not a response or
well, our commitment to insulate 5 million homes is and actually consulting on improving energy efficiency of private rented sector and social housing, I think is something new.
Very supportive of. I think my time is up.
Peter Bedford.
Thank you, Chair. And it's nice to welcome you, Secretary of State, to today's session. Would you agree there's a tension between your department in order to make savings as a result of the changes to the winter fuel payment and also having to increase pension credit uptake?
I thought somebody might ask this question. For me, there's no tension, because I think it is a scandal that over 800,000 pensioners, the poorest pensioners, are losing up to £3,900 in pension credit that they should be entitled to. I also know that over many, many years, we've not been able to solve this because it is difficult to increase take-up. People don't want to claim. They may feel stigma or ashamed of claiming. The pension credit form is very, very long. We've got more people doing this online now, but we've got to solve that. And I think it should not be beyond the wit of man or even womankind to actually solve this problem, which is why ultimately we have got to make this much more automatic entitlement. So for me, there's no tension, because I am going to move heaven and earth to do what I can to stop that, because it's not right.
That's really reassuring to hear. But in terms of the cost savings involved, I think the government's plan was to increase take-up by 5% percentage points.
Well, that was on the 5% increase that the OBR has scored in the budget was on the basis of action taken by the previous government. I think it was around free TV licences, like what do we actually think that will increase by? Well, of course it would only be 5% if we only did what the last government did, but actually we are writing for the first time, the letters are going out, if not all out now. Peter will correct me, I'm sure, if I've got this wrong, to the 120,000. Let me say why I'm so obsessed with the housing benefit and pension credit take-up. We ran a pilot at the department where we got the data from the council of people on housing benefit and wrote to them all to say you might be entitled to pension credit, and of those that came forward, 75% were. Right? So that's why we're so focused on this issue. So we've already written to them all, but ultimately I don't want to be writing letters to people and they get lost in the post and all the rest of it. We want to have a proper merger of those two systems, which will make a real difference. I've also asked the department to look again at the pension credit form, which is long and all the rest of it, and I hope I can update the House soon on how we want to simplify that and make it quicker. We know 80 to 90% of claims are already online, but lots of people, may not be used to using, not have good digital skills. So there's a lot more we need to do. So I know it is tough to increase take up, but we've got to keep trying.
I come at this as an accountant. I love numbers. So it would be really helpful if you could perhaps publish more data on the direct cost of this for increased pension credit take-up versus the additional costs to the department around all those kind of gateway benefits that will be incurred. Because the government's own position in the budget was that this would make a savings of about 1.5 billion. Mm-hmm. Well, clearly that's not going to happen if the additional cost to your department is going to balloon as a result of the additional take-up.
I look, the reason why we took the decision. We needed to make in-year savings. But may I also just be very clear to the committee, the Chancellor is also really, really onto this and increasing take-up and likes regular updates of how we are doing. So she is as committed as I am to doing that. But we will publish data about claims and uptake, and I am sure that in the normal course of things, the OBR, the Treasury, will also be looking at what the savings are. You know, that's their job, and I'm sure all of that information will be made available to the House.
Yeah, I mean, just to build on that, so as you say, Mr. Bedford, the forecast in the OBR did assume a take-up of 5 percentage points. So that's already scored, including the costs of doing all the things that the Secretary of State has described. Particularly that we've written to 12 million pensioners. We've written, we started on the 31st of October writing to 120,000 state pensioners who are receiving housing benefit. And going forward, what we're going to be doing as new claims come in from January onwards to housing benefit, we'll be using our data analysis to work out whether they're likely also to be entitled to pension credit. The system still requires people to make the claim, but actually prompting people much more effectively than we've ever done in the past is a good precursor then to the work we'll ultimately get on to from 2026, which is actually merging housing benefit and pension credit. So when you claim for one, you automatically get assessed for the other. And these are all really important things. Every 6 months or twice a year, the OBR forecasts the overall spend on benefit expenditure, including pension credit. So they'll take into account any change to their assumptions that they've made this time round in terms of the take-up of pension credit. So you'll be able to see how that plays out in terms of the overall savings and forecasts going forward.
Very quickly, Peter.
So in summary, Secretary of State, I was pleased with some of your answers around the take-up and the push towards that. So your ambition goes beyond the 5% that was baked into the OBR's piece of work, and you would want to see essentially 100% take-up.
I'd like every pensioner who's entitled to pension credit up to £3,900 to get it. Yes.
Regardless of cost to your department?
Regardless. Because they are entitled to it. That's what I want to see. Now, I am not claiming I'm going to give you a date. This is by the time by which it is hard. But I am determined to do everything I can.
Thank you.
Very quick one from Neil Coyle.
Thanks, Chair. And congratulations to the new Secretary of State. It's great to see you both clearing up the mess of the last government. That take-up campaign that you've talked about, what's the knock-on effect for the department in terms of the pension credit processing times? Is the take-up campaign and publicity meaning that you're seeing so many new applications that it's slowing down the process?
I mean, the short answer to that is yes, we are seeing an increase in the time. So we've seen the latest published figures we've got is that there's been a 152% increase in claims. I think that for September, the average time was within the 50 days, 10 weeks goal. But that in October, that has crept up to 52 days. But that is why we have deployed 500 additional staff onto this to try and make sure that those times are kept as low as possible. But I don't know if Peter wants to say it, because we've been really focused on Peter's been absolutely proactive in this and saying these are the steps we need to take to keep these assessment times down.
Yeah, exactly. So just so the committee have got the numbers, in the 8 weeks before the announcement by the Chancellor on the 29th of July, there were 29,500 claims to pension credit. For the 8 weeks afterwards, there were 74,400. So that's the genesis of the 152% increase that the Secretary of State was talking about. Naturally, that is huge numbers of additional claims for us to work our way through. We're absolutely committed to addressing that. Previously, we had 352 people working on pension credit claims. As the Secretary of State says, we're increasing that by a further 500, so that's more than doubling. We're also looking at other ways of streamlining processes and putting in automation where it's possible. It's not an easy benefit to put a lot of automation in, I have to say. It is complex. It requires data feeds from, or it requires data that we don't have automatic feeds for, because it's more than just income. It relates to issues around residency and around other aspects that are caught in the claim form. We're trying to make the claim form more straightforward, particularly by doing more online. As the Secretary of State says, now less than 10% of claims are on the paper form. That has come down from about 30 or 40% earlier in the year. So that is quite a dramatic change. And that online form, Secretary of State says we do need to make sure that customers are able to use it. But if you're able to use it, it's much more intuitive. It takes you to where you need to go to next, as opposed to working your way through a 24-page form. So there's a lot that we're doing on this front, but we'll keep the committee up to date, I'm sure, in terms of statistics. The next set of
Is that for the
statistics-
committee or for the House? Because it links to Peter's question about, for want of a better term, the success rate of applications is one that I think the committee would want to know. You've mentioned 500 additional staff and 120,000 letters, is that right?
The 120,000, so we've written to all pensioners about the change.
So that was
and
12 million.
And then to the 120,000 on housing benefit, trying to encourage them to claim too. But later this month, I think it's the 28th of November, we'll be publishing the latest claims and, I believe, uptake figures. So that will be...
Are there measurables within that to try and reach that up to 800,000 target then? Does the department have a target for how many you expect to see each month, or is that not the process adopted?
No, we don't have a target for each month.
Okay, and
basically what you have to survey,
quickly.
you have to try and work out who might conceivably be eligible, and that requires us to use our survey data that we only do once a year. Sorry.
Okay, and I think the chair's been very disciplined on time, so it's really tight. But this process about automating pension credit applications is really good news for National Association of Welfare Rights Advisors, my local support team at Southwark Council, who do good work on this and have called for this for years. But I can't quite tell if it is going to be automated or you want it to be as automated as possible. Is the department going to set a timetable for when it is expected that it'll be an automatic process for anyone over state retirement age applying for housing benefit will automatically have this done?
So there are two stages to this, Mr. Coyle. One is the prompting, and that is obviously more straightforward to do. That's what we've started already with the stock. So we took 1.1 million people who are pension age who are on housing benefit and worked out the 120,000 of them most likely to be eligible for pension credit, and we've written to them.
But this is prompting, this isn't
No,
guaranteeing.
I was going to have I got time just to finish the question? So then we do that for all new claims from January, but then the crucial next stage is not an automatic. What we do is we merge pension credit with housing benefit, a bit like we've done for universal credit in that respect. So when you claim for one, you claim for the other. So we automatically ask you the questions. You claim for housing benefit as a state pensioner, we automatically ask you the questions as part of that process, would enable us to assess you for pension credit. And that way we see huge impact in terms of take-up coming forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Jill German.
Thank you, and welcome, Secretary of State. Really great to have you with us here today. I want to turn to employment, if I may. So yesterday's Office of National Statistics figures showed that there were 2.8 million people out of work due to ill health, and I believe that's a near record. And I know that you said that tackling economic inactivity is your number one priority. So I would just wondered if you could tell us more about the Get Britain Working white paper that I know is to be published soon, and a little more about the proposals of getting long-term sick back to work where appropriate.
So I think this is the biggest employment challenge we face. Although we've seen some changes in the latest stats, official unemployment is still low by historic standards. But we have seen this really worrying increase in the number of people who are what's termed economically inactive. In a way, it's a terrible phrase because this is real human beings. And I think the most worrying aspect for me is the 2.8 million people out of work due to long-term sickness. And within that, one of the most concerning aspects is the increase in the number of young people not in education, employment or training. Because we know if that happens when you're young, the impacts can be lifelong in terms of your future jobs prospects, earnings and health, actually. And the system of employment support that we have and our job centres, which I should say have some of the most committed, brilliant staff who really care about their communities and want to help, but because of the way the system works, I think we have very much focused on official unemployment and administering and monitoring benefits, particularly the big implementation of universal credit. Do not get me wrong, we absolutely are determined to keep unemployment low. I mean, our party was born out of the fight against unemployment. But we need a fundamental series of reforms to focus on the problems of today and tomorrow, which is the fact that we are an older, sicker population, and that is having real impact. It's not just those out of work due to long-term sickness. There's even more, over 4 million in work with a health-limiting condition, and 300,000 people every year falling out of work. And the truth is, as we live for longer and work for longer and care for longer, we have got to address this health and work question. Now, there are many people, we know from the official reports, 2 million say they want to work if they could get the right help and support. And where they've really delved into this issue, particularly I would reference members of the committee to a report in Barnsley that actually spoke to people, actually talked to the people this is about, who said they found 7 in 10 said if they could find a job that matched their health needs and their family needs, they want to work. So we have got to have some big reforms, and then there's 3 key areas that we need to focus on. One is we need to join up health, work and skills support locally. I won't because I know we haven't got enough time, but I have in my own constituency, I must have visited 9 or 10 different bits of support, what my hospital is doing to employ young people with special educational needs and learning difficulties, what my local football club is doing to get young people who might go off track, trying to hook them back in through the power of sport. All sorts of different projects that aren't joined up with my college, with the job centre. So, number one, we've got to join that all up. And I think you need, that needs to be much more localised. I mean, I know Leicester, but I don't know what's happening in your constituency. I don't know what the best way is to join up support there. Mm-hmm. Secondly, we need a specific youth guarantee, because we will not allow young people not to be in education, employment or training. It's terrible for them. That's got to have a real focus. And the third thing is to really overhaul our job centres so that they are no longer such, and this is not about our work coaches, it's about the system that they're doing, but it's not all about a sort of tick box monitoring, assessing, policing benefits, but is genuinely what they are there to be, which is a public employment service. But it's also crucial that I think they need to be more open so that it's, if you're thinking of retraining or reskilling or changing your career. So we need a big overhaul there, and those are the 3 elements in our Get Britain working white paper, £240 million that the Chancellor announced in the budget. Peter will say something, that is a big change. It's a change from being what I call a very centralised service, which we are, and a very siloed service. There are brilliant examples of where people are working with employers or working with colleges or focusing on care leavers, but it's not joined up and it's not localised enough and it's not focused on the problems.
Back on the people who are long-term sick, so you talked about working with health professionals, which I think is absolutely crucial, because the right work needs to be found. So can you tell me a bit more about what that work will look like, and also how you get employers on board? Because if there are workplaces where if reasonable adjustments are made, that people can get into work, then how do we make sure that whole infrastructure is there?
Please.
Gosh, how can I be brief on that? Well, number one, when you've only got 1 in 6 employers ever uses the job centre to recruit, and that falls to only 1 in 10 of small and medium-sized companies, that's not good enough. So we need to work much more closely with employers, and places like Greater Manchester are already doing great stuff where they have people who act as kind of brokers between the employers, so helping them understand what adjustments they can make, as well as the benefits of employing people with neurodiversity, those with autism, who with the right help and support can become incredibly committed, supported employees. And in terms of working with the health service, this is critical, because the truth is is that good work is good for health. There is very strong evidence from individual placement and support run by the NHS, and this is for people with quite severe mental health needs, that if you actually work with people to find the jobs that they want, that they're keen to do, you provide them with the support, you work with employer to make the adjustments, and then you stay with the person once they're in work, because it can be really stressful starting a job. They've shown 44% of people in work after 5 years. That is a number we would kill for in a job, in employment programs, and that the person's relapses are dramatically reduced, and their number of days spent in a hospital so much reduced. It's like it saves £20,000 per person over 5 years. Good for health, good for the person, good for employers. We need much more of that. Sorry, I couldn't be shorter.
I know you've got a lot to say on your first session, but we do need to speed up, folks, okay? I'm going to hand over to David Pinto-Dushinsky.
Thank you, and I'll just keep this to one brief question, because I think we've covered some of the issues I wanted to touch on. And thank you so much for coming to join us, Secretary of State, and thank you for your previous answers. I wanted to take your answers and just double-click in, kind of focus in on the issue of youth inactivity. So obviously, under the last government, we witnessed a huge rise in the number of young people economically inactive. And recent data shows that high levels of inactivity are strongly linked with low levels of skill, with 79% of people young people who are inactive due to ill health having skill levels at GCSEs or below. You mentioned the youth guarantee. Could you say a bit more about what plans the department has to tackle this skills gap among the young inactive to help them re-engage, and how that guarantee will help deliver that?
Well, firstly, we are, with the Department for Education, reforming the apprenticeship levy so that we have a clear focus on young people, but also what they call foundation apprenticeships, which is the basic skills you're talking about, so that we can make sure people have got the skills they need to get onto an apprenticeship. I think that's extremely important. Secondly, I think we actually need to start much earlier. That is why I'm very keen to work with organisations that go into schools, work with young people who might be at risk of not getting any GCSEs or being excluded, because we need to find a hook back for those young people. And I've visited many organisations in my own patch, especially around, I would say, sport, arts and culture, who can engage young people in a way much better than the state ever can. So we need to start earlier in schools to prevent people from falling out. We need to, if they have done, look at the basic skills, including through reforming the apprenticeship levy, to get people back onto the right track. We have work that's going on in DWP youth hubs, which needs to be much better joined up with all of this different support. There's actually quite a lot going on already that's not joined up, but crucially, in my mind, there's no one body who is kind of responsible and therefore accountable. Of course, lots of people are involved, but we have to find a way of both preventing people from falling out, finding those who are already not in education, employment and training, join up the support and bring them back in. There'll be much more in the white paper about this, and I hope that we will see some really significant, what we are calling trailblazers in local areas, to say, let's put this package together, let's learn from best practice, but we will not allow young people not to be in education or employment or training, because we know the consequences can be lifelong.
Just building that just in terms of some examples as well, because we know young people might not feel comfortable coming into a job centre, but there are certain places that they will feel comfortable going to. Mm-hmm. So I was in the Emirates Stadium a few weeks ago. Actually, a few weeks before that, I was in the Tottenham Stadium, just to kind of, in case there's anyone from North London worried about that. But in the Emirates, we had this jobs fair, where in the same place we had employers who were willing to take people on. We had FE College there, able to provide skills in terms of those basic skills, people who had not got basic levels of maths and English, for example, bringing it all together, supporting people into apprenticeships, supporting people into employment support that would then enable them to have long-term employment. And because it was in a place like the Emirates, it's a place where people want to come. And then last week I was in West Midlands in Walsall, and they have a place called The Link in one of the shopping centres there. And that's a place where, again, it's a multi-agency approach. Everyone from the council to the job centre to the college is run by the college. They're all there in this one place. It's a welcoming place where they offer adult training courses and other courses for young people. And it's a place where there's hope, there's support, and there's a real sense of mission driving forward. And these are when the Secretary of State talks about the things that are already there are lots of these places all around the country when you search them out. And what we really want to do with the Youth Guarantee is join that together in a coherent offer that all young people have that support available wherever they are.
In a place where they want to, I think that's really important that the Permanent Secretary says is, I think we've got to go to where people are, not tell them to come to us.
Thank you.
There's no one who's hard to reach. We're just rubbish at reaching them.
Thank you. Right, we're going to move on to the next set of questions, which is on health assessment, and we're going to start off with Amanda Hack and then move on to Steve Darling.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Secretary of State, for joining us today. If you're looking at my post bag, but also lots of conversations, there's certainly been an awful lot of uncertainty around benefits and disabled people, and one of those is the reform that's planned on work capability assessment. How do Labour's plans differ from the previous government's proposals?
Well, thank you for that question. This is something that I am very, very focused on, and there will be some more about this in our Get Britain Working white paper, but also in the coming months. Look, we've argued for a long time that the work capability assessment isn't working and that it needs to be reformed or replaced alongside a proper plan to support disabled people, and that's what we said in our manifesto. At a practical level, for too many people, they have a really bad experience of the system. They wait too long, and too many decisions are overturned. That's true for WCA and for PIP as well. I know this only too well from my own surgeries. But more fundamentally, I think the problem within the sickness and disability system is that, there's a sort of really binary classification between those who are able to work and those who are unable to work, when the truth is, apart from those with very, very severe disabilities, many people's health conditions fluctuate, and it depends on the job that they have, the flexibility that might be available, and a number of other issues. And I think we're also failing to really sort of help people stay in work or get back to work more quickly. We know that 90% of people who get back into work after a sort of bout of sickness do so within the first year. Right? So basically, we've got to get this right very, very early on. But instead of doing that, the system sort of makes you go into a benefit assessment queue waiting to be sort of classified. So I think there are a number of real problems in the system, and so we are looking at the system as a whole, and will bring forward our own proposals. But this is extremely difficult because people are frightened. And, after 14 years of a government that took a very, very different approach, that I believe wrote people off, then blamed them, I am not surprised that people are concerned and worried. So, as the Chancellor has announced and the OBR has acknowledged, whilst we will make the savings that the former government has been scored, we will be bringing forward our own proposals, and we will be consulting with, obviously, my view is we always need to genuinely consult with disabled people in the organisations that represent them. This is a huge, huge challenge, but we want a system that genuinely supports people into work, those who can work, that provides decent support, and above all, I would say, this is about, for me, this is a principle of equality. I believe disabled people should have the same rights, choices to work, to independent living as everybody else. That is the core that runs through us. So that's the absolute principle. I cannot give you more detailed response now, but that is our approach. And I think it's really important to set that out to the committee.
We look forward to hearing more. I'm going to hand over to Steve Darling now.
Yeah, thank you, Secretary of State, for joining us today. It really is appreciated. I really want to focus on how you are involving people with disabilities in your department, and particularly this area of work. How are you helping co-design? Because that is extremely important. And also, I really want to hear from you, Secretary of State, around culture, because culture is so important. And as the new Secretary of State, what culture change are you driving in the organisation? I'm really worried that the response you just gave to my colleague was a lot of what was wrong, but not what you're going to do. And I'd really be grateful if you focused on what you and your colleagues were going to actually do.
Well, I hope that by setting out what I think is wrong indicates the issues that I want to put right. That's, I think,
what are you going to do? That's the crucial thing. That's what we're here to hear.
Well, as I said, we will bring forward our own proposals for reform, and I think there are several really important elements to that. Firstly, that we will actually provide genuine help for people to get into work. We're not just about making cuts. That we want genuine engagement with disabled people, not just sort of presenting proposals as a fait accompli, and that it is the principle of equality that is at the heart of all we do. And let me just say a couple of practical things here. I do believe we need to change the culture here. That is why we have published over 30 reports that have been held back by the previous government, because we want to be open. That's very, very important to me. It's why I've done things like announce an independent review into carers allowance, because we need to learn from the problems and the mistakes that were made to make sure that they don't happen again. And I would just say this, you won't know this about me, I wouldn't expect you to, but when before I became DWP Secretary of State, I worked in social care for most of my life, and the principle that you need to not just ask and consult, but actually work with disabled people, because I don't always assume we know best. People know best their lives, their problems, their issues. So that is something I've always believed in and acted upon. You rightly want lots more information and answers about our plans, and that is your job. But I also have to look at all of these issues, which are very complex, can be very frightening to people. But we start with a positive offer of help and support for people. We want to intervene much earlier so we don't let problems get worse. But the principle that we believe in, the equal lives and equal life chances of disabled people, is at the heart of all that we do.
Thank you, Secretary of State. Is that right, Steve?
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Damien Egan now.
Thank you, Secretary of State. I really appreciate the focus bit and passion that clearly comes through around the economic activity piece, and also welcome the kind of, you touched on it, like a lot of those answers lie within our communities. And as a former local government leader, there's different local councils that were doing really good things on work programmes. I want to delve in a little bit on the on incapacity benefits, and one of the biggest spikes that we're seeing is about people claiming around mental and behavioural conditions. Not only is this costing, the big spike, when we're at outlier, the UK is an outlier in the OECD. So it'd be interesting to kind of hear your very early thoughts about why that is. It's obviously costing the taxpayer billions, but it's also the human cost on the individual. And the interesting bit around the the mental and behaviour conditions is that there's a real, you can see the real spikes around age, so younger people coming forward. So according to the IFS, 69% of 25-year-olds who are claiming incapacity benefits coming through with mental and behavioural conditions. That's 22% with 55-year-olds. So I guess early thoughts about that spike. The previous government had that consultation out on reforming PIP. And I guess just a practical question about when, if you're able to, when can we give a commitment to applying on consultation?
A lot to unpack there. The increase. Why are we an outlier? Why is it that we're the only G7 country whose employment rate hasn't gone back to pre-pandemic levels? I think we're an older, sicker nation. Life expectancy and healthy life expectancy stalled long before COVID hit. And we need to get people back to health, back to work. We need to sort out problems in the NHS. We need to intervene earlier. We need to tackle the root causes of ill health. I mean, if you look around the country, the places that have the worst life expectancy and lowest healthy life expectancy and the highest economic inactivity are the same places, parts of the country, that were, written off and by the last but one Tory government, and the last one promised to level them up and actually didn't. So there's a whole series of issues that we've got to sort out there. On young people, I do not agree with the last government that people were just feeling too bluesy to work. I mean, I don't know which people or places he was going to, but it was not anything that matched any kind of reality. Looking at the evidence, as well as my own personal experience, it is clear that I think that there is something around for young people, the impact of COVID, possibly also built on top of cost of living crisis, anxious, worried parents, anxious, worried children, plus social media, plus less stigma about reporting mental health. I wish in life there was one reason that that you could give an easy headline for, but life's not like that. There are complicated things going on with mental health. That's why we've really got to intervene early, and I would say kind of goes back to the youth guarantee. One of the reasons we want mental health support in every school and mental health support in open access hubs in every community is we know these problems start young, so we've got to intervene much earlier. So these are, I think, a healthy nation and a healthy economy are two sides of the same coin. But this is a massively difficult issue to solve because you're trying to join up public services nationally and locally. You're dealing with reform of the public sector, but also where it meets the economy and the changing nature of work and jobs. So this isn't easy, but, I've never ducked a challenge in my life and I don't intend to start now. So this is a big, big thing that we need to do. And on the PIP consultations, we had, I think, 1,600 responses to the consultation. The previous, they didn't have a plan, they had a consultation. And I would say, I was very struck, particularly by the comments people made around shifting support to vouchers, and where many organisations said their real concern was that it took away people's autonomy, and particularly when services are so stretched and tight. So I've read those very, very carefully. As I said in my previous answer, we will be putting forward our own proposals to reform sickness and disability benefits, but based on those clear principles, getting the decisions right first time, early intervention, genuine support to help people into work, help people live full, fulfilling and independent lives. But this is extremely difficult, and I know people really want more detail, but we won't do that until we're absolutely ready and have had the proper discussions with people.
Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary of State. I'm going to hand back to Steve Darling.
Thank you. I wanted to probe a little bit further. One area, I recently at surgery had a resident who I've known for many years, and he and his wife have fostered, probably more than 20 children in Torbay. Sadly, his wife is now virtually bedbound and in receipt of PIP. She is worried sick about vouchers being offered up and her not being able to have a richer life by being able to buy into Netflix. Will you rule out vouchers?
I've just said I'm really aware of people's concerns about that, and whilst if I can, again, you'll forgive me for referring to my previous experience in social care, which is if all the support is given to local councils, the NHS, and they determine what help and support people get. Look, people in my council, people in my NHS are good people trying to do good things, but they don't always get the decisions right for people. And I never forget when a young woman in Leicester who wanted to use her personal budget for personal assistance to get out and about, see her friends, possibly get work. And the council said, we can, she was feeling depressed, being stuck at home. And the council said, we can refer you to our befriending service. And she said, I don't want to meet your friends. I want to meet my friends. Now, the council wasn't being that, but she didn't want to meet a false friend. They're not my friend. It was the being trapped at home. So this issue of empowerment and giving people power and control over their lives is really important, because I think it leads to better results. So I understand people's real concerns about that. I really do.
Thank you. And just another brief question. Throughout your evidence so far this morning, you've made it plain your understanding that a lot of these wicked issues are cross-cutting, and there are no simple solutions. What changes have you made to the department to make sure the department has a less siloed approach to supporting people with disabilities? And and what evidence can you share with the committee of what actions you've taken as Secretary of State to make sure that we've got this more cross-cutting approach, particularly in respect of health support, to get people in the right place to be able to have meaningful and productive lives?
Well, we already have a joint work and health unit with the Department for Health and Social Care, and was it earlier this week or was it last week? I've completely lost track of time. I went on a visit with Wes Streeting to a new Workwell pilot in North London, where we are genuinely joining up. GPs are referring people to new Workwell coaches and advisors who can also get physiotherapy, counselling, all of these CV interview advice, joining that up. I think that, Peter can speak for himself, but the department knows that they can't deal with all the problems. Our work coaches know that a 10-minute weekly, fortnightly mandatory assessment isn't going to doesn't have the time to deal with these problems, that they desperately do need more talking therapists to be able to refer people to have the right skills for young people who've left without basic English, Maths, GCSE. So the white paper will set out our vision about how we join these services up. Operationally, that's extremely challenging, but I believe that together we can make that happen. But I don't know if Peter wants to say any more about this issue.
If you could.
Yeah, absolutely. While the Secretary of State was in North London last Thursday, I was in Wolverhampton, also seeing a Workwell pilot. And the work has been underway for some time. The programme has been developed by our joint unit with the Department of Health and Social Care. But I think increasingly what you're seeing is a momentum behind this agenda. You'll have seen that backed by support from the spending review, some of the money coming out of the spending review, and the rollout of Connect for Work from next year onwards as well. And you'll see it in terms of the way the join-up is being shared on the ground, the examples that we're seeing in North London, in the West Midlands, in Greater Manchester, in South Yorkshire. Those are examples where we're seeing great success, not just in terms of kind of crude kind of business case, but in terms of lives being changed. And I think, really taken by the 4 participants that I met last week, and the experience that they'd had with the type of individual placement and support that then helps them not only into work, but supports them through work, or where there's a health condition, particularly a mental health condition, and it's enabling them to get treatment for that mental health condition, and in some cases to stay in work using an advocate to talk to their employer about reasonable adjustments so they can stay in work rather than fall out of work in the first place. But the crucial thing here is developing an evidence base of lives being changed in places in the country where we've tried this out. And that then enables us to make the case for further investment in future spending reviews.
And that it has to be led, it's got to be turbocharged, and I believe much more led locally, because that's the place you really join it up, not here.
And on that point, I'm going to hand back to David Pinto-Dushinsky.
Thank you. And I will just ask a very brief question. I realise we are short of time, and it's picking up some of the earlier themes around employment support and some of the things you raised on inactivity. Obviously, support to help people progress in the labour market into better jobs has a profound impact both on long-term employment and on issues of poverty and child poverty. And the government's outlined plans to merge JC Plus and the career service, and I think this is really welcome to form an advancement service. Can you just give a bit more detail on what those on those plans, and what services and support you envisage them providing?
Well, I wish we, maybe if you invite me, I would like to come back after our white paper, because there'll be so much more in that, and I don't want to get on even more on the wrong side of the speaker by divulging details here. But I think really the big picture here is that we need to move our job centres away from the sort of overwhelming focus on monitoring and assessing benefits and a kind of tick box approach and 10-minute weekly, fortnightly mandatory assessments. We need to free up their time to focus much more on what we all know yes, the benefits system can incentivise or disincentivise work, but we know that it's childcare, family care, skills, transport, flexibility at work, all of that matters. So our new jobs and careers service will be much more embedded locally to link up with those different services and support. It will have a clear focus on not just getting people into work, but on in their work, because we know only 1 in 6 people ever fully escape slow pay, and all the knock-on consequences that has. So there'll be a big reform there. And again, there will be support through this £240 million investment that we've had from the Chancellor to model this in the coming weeks and months, very much embedded in local communities. So hopefully you'll find out more in the white paper.
Thank you. And at that stage, I'm going to call a 5-minute recess. Thank you, everyone.
you. Would you be able to outline the plans for the review of universal credit, please? I mean, clearly, having been involved in the original rollout of universal credit, I think there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done. So it'd be really interesting to hear your view on that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Chair, I will try and be shorter. I apologise. So we, as you know, we have a very clear manifesto commitment to review universal credit, to tackle poverty and make work pay. Those are the two absolutely central tenets of that. I think 15 years on from when it was, originally sort of brought in, is a good time to do that, to take stock. Stephen Timms, the former chair of this committee, will be leading that work, but actually it's already started. You'll know one of the first things we've done that I'm extremely proud of is that we have introduced a new fair repayment rate in universal credit to slash the level of deductions that can be taken from 25 to 15%, giving 1.2 million of the poorest households on average £420 a year. And the reason we did that as the first step in this review is because plunging people into even worse poverty and debt isn't something we should be doing. And as the former chair of Feeding Leicester, the programme to end hunger in my city, food banks told me that was one of the biggest reasons why people were forced to depend on food banks. And I am very proud that we've made that change. There is so much more to do on the review and on tackling poverty, but that's a first step.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Secretary of State. Would you be able to write to the committee in relation to transitional protections for severely disabled people? I know the disability premium issue is still a massive issue, and just to update the position with the new government around the transitional protections for severely disabled. Thank you so much. Now we're going to move on to the next item, and Jill German's going to open for us here.
Thank you, Chair. So I really welcomed the increase in the earnings threshold for the carers allowance in the recent budget, and that's obviously really important that carers can carry on caring but also be able to go out to work. So I just wondered what assessments you'd done on how that will affect carers, the number of carers who will benefit from that, either to stay in work or to get into work.
Yeah. And this is just because you change jobs doesn't mean you stop caring about the things you care about. And I have been a lifelong champion of family carers from my time as the Shadow Minister for Social Care and as a human being as well, with family and friends and constituents, and just seeing how many more people now are caring for an elderly or disabled loved one and also trying to hold down work. So this is the biggest ever increase in the earnings threshold. So now you can work the equivalent of 2 days at the national minimum wage without losing your carer's allowance. We think that will benefit, I think it's 60,000 new family carers. And I think it is an indication of the value that we place on family unpaid carers. And also, let's be honest, as a woman, as a feminist, family life now isn't only about caring for your kids. It is about caring for elderly relatives too. And women, as they get into their 50s, 60s, and they want to keep working as well as caring. And we've got to wake up to the fact that as part of an ageing society, this is the reality of family life now. But that also comes on top of, and we may come on to this, another step we've taken, which is to have an independent review into the overpayment of carers' allowance, which has caused real concern. I'm really glad Liz Sace is doing that, and we hope to announce terms of reference for that review soon. Those are 2 steps we're taking. There's a lot more to do, but I hope it's a start.
Thank you. And a very brief one from Steve Darling.
Thank you. I really wanted to explore respite care for carers, and what consideration are you giving to that, as we need to make sure that we're avoiding burnout for these people who are doing these amazing support to their relatives?
Well, that's the responsibility of the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, but he is acutely aware both of the need to transform social care in this country to better support paid carers and unpaid family carers. But that might be something, if you're interested in respite care, that the chair would be able to ask the chair of the Health and Social Care Committee to question the Health Secretary about.
It might be worth just saying there is already provision in carers allowance to deduct the cost of respite care when you calculate the earnings threshold each week. So there's something in it, but as the Secretary of State says, there's a much wider issue here for DHSC.
Thank you. Very grateful. We're moving on now to Jo.
Thank you, and welcome to Liz, the Secretary of State. It's great to have you with us today. It's very positive that the government asked the Low Pay Commission to take account of the cost of living when making recommendations on the national living wage. Do you think we could have a similar approach to deciding how benefit levels are set?
Well, I agree definitely with the first part of your question. I think the increase in the national living wage that's announced in the budget that will benefit 3 million low-paid workers is a huge, huge step forward. You'll know that we are currently, certainly in this budget, uprated benefits in line with inflation. There's no plans to change that at the moment, but what I would say is that we do understand the need to, as I said, review universal credit to tackle poverty, to make work pay. We've started with this, I kind of call it a poverty down payment with our new fair repayment rate. And I think that's a really important step forward, but it's got to also be seen within the context of our bigger employment support reforms, because we need more people into work, we need them into better paid jobs, and that's a huge issue for the government through all sorts of areas, our modern industrial strategy, clean energy plans, and the benefit system is part of that, but it's part of a much bigger package of reforms.
Follow up just because obviously throughout the predecessor committee's inquiry on benefit levels in the UK, it heard evidence that shortfalls between housing support and actual rental costs had eroded household incomes. Do you think it would be possible to set out measurable objectives for benefit levels linked to living costs?
Well, I know lots of organisations have called for things like an essentials guarantee, Joseph Rowntree, Trussell Trust, and others. You will know very clearly from the Prime Minister and the Chancellor that we will only set out policies when we can show how we can afford them, how we can pay for them, but we have made a start on tackling the deepest forms of poverty through the fair repayment rate, through extending the household support fund despite all the challenges we face. And on housing, I really understand those problems and challenges. I see them within my own city. But ultimately, the key here has got to be building more homes, more social and affordable housing, tackling homelessness, a whole bunch of issues, which, as you know, we're doing in other parts of government.
Just to build on that, literally, there was 500 million announced in the budget to add to the Affordable Homes Programme for next year in the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and there's also £100 million in discretionary housing payments announced alongside the Household Support Fund, all there to help local areas support people through those housing costs.
Thank you both. John, you're going to follow up.
Thank you. Yes, local housing allowance rates were frozen for 4 years, which pushed many renters into debt. We've had a 1 year up rating, a single year up rating. Is there any rationale behind not making that permanent, that it would be uprated every year? or is it purely financial reasons, or is there you have a view that it's not necessary, perhaps?
There are many changes I and people across government would like to make after 14 years of a Conservative government. But we will only make promises we know we can afford and that we know we can keep. And there were difficult decisions and priorities taken. But as I said, I am only too well aware of the implications of that continued freeze. But we have taken other steps, some of them that Peter's talked about, housing support. I think it was around £5 billion of government investment to deliver on our housing plans next year. The Chancellor announced in the budget, alongside increasing the Affordable Homes Programme. We have provided what I hope is some stability to social housing providers with the social housing rent settlement of CPI plus 1% for the next 5 years, reducing the right to buy discounts, and enabling councils to retain the full receipts of those, so that they of any sales, so they can reinvest back in the local community. So we are making steps forward to tackle the root causes of the problem on housing, but there were many decisions and difficult decisions we had to make in the budget. But I think we chose the right priorities. There's a lot more we need to do.
In principle, you would uprate it if you could financially.
What I would, you will rightly push me to say things, but I'm not into a wink and a nudge politics. I am into, if I'm going to do something, I'll say I'll do it. I'll show how I'm going to afford it. What I am absolutely determined to do, along with the rest of the government, is to increase the amount of housing in this country, including affordable and social housing. This is the root cause of the problems. I mean, Peter will know this from this job and his previous job. All the money we're spending on housing because we haven't got enough homes and people haven't got a hope in hell of getting on the housing line. So that is what we are prioritising, alongside some of the additional support that Peter's outlined.
So, and just to add to that, by putting more money into the Affordable Homes Programme, the grant programmes in MHCLG, and allowing social landlords to increase their rents by CPI plus 1, that gives social landlords the opportunity to give them the stability to invest in new affordable homes. It's part of the government's overall plans to build 1.5 million homes over the course of the 5 years. And by doing that, you have less reliance on the private rented sector, which is where the pressure comes from the LHA. So it's trying to get upstream of the challenge rather than, just addressing the downstream element, the cost into the private rented sector, which is where you see the pressure on the LHA.
Thank you. Then moving on to WASPy Women. Really appreciate that you've taken rapid action on the infected blood scandal and Horizon scandal to sort out conversation there. WASPy Women, however, a notable absence of these hangover things, should we say, from the last administration. So I think what people really like to know is when do you think you can address it? Can it be next year, or what plans do you have?
I mean, I want to respond to this as soon as possible. I know how long this issue has taken. I think even the Ombudsman took 6 years to do his report. It wasn't responded to by the previous government. I know, and I know there are some of the WASPy women here today in the committee. I met the WASPy campaign when I was a shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. The Pensions Minister has met the campaigners, I think the first minister to do so for 6 years or longer. So I want this resolved as quickly as possible. But this is, again, extremely complicated. Lots of information to go through. We need to get it right, but I want this resolved as soon as possible. I can't give you any more. I mean, if I gave you a date, then I'd have sorted it, and it needs to be sorted, but I will do it as soon as humanly possible.
Thank you. Secretary of State, you probably are aware of the inquiry that the previous committee undertook around safeguarding vulnerable claimants. This committee has decided to reopen that inquiry, and we're in the process of calling for an update on evidence in that regard. And you'll be aware that this inquiry was a result of a number of deaths of vulnerable claimants, hundreds that the department identified as needing an investigation, and as the NAO report in 2020 stated, that was probably the tip of the iceberg. So it is an important one for us to be undertaking. And again, 5 prevention of future deaths notices from coroners to the department. The previous government said it was not necessary to introduce a statutory duty to safeguard claimants, and I wonder if you're of the same view.
No, I'm open to the suggestion. Look, I, as the Secretary of State, and I know the Permanent Secretary too, I don't just want people to be safe, which is the bare minimum. I want the best possible standard of care and support for people who rely on us. And I'm glad that the committee is continuing its work, and I really look forward to reading your report and your recommendations. I think that being open about problems is the only way you solve them. Mm-hmm. Again, forgive me for referring to my time within the NHS and social care, but, and you'll know this as well, as because of your interest in health, that when there were problems in the NHS around Mid-Staffs Hospital, mistakes being made but not being open about them, learning from mistakes to put into best practice, then was a duty of candour was brought in. I don't think laws alone change behaviour. It's about culture and leadership from the top, but they can help. And that is how I have seen. I sometimes think you need to look at both. So this isn't a commitment to doing it, but I am open to it, because we want to make sure not only all of our policies, procedures, practices, contracts, staff, training, all of that has got to be right, and I'm very open to looking at all the possible mechanisms for achieving that.
So a system-wide approach.
Yeah, I think that you have to come at it from every level. We are a huge organisation, over 85,000 staff all over the country, contracted out provision, in-house. We have got to get everything right, and, we have nothing to fear from that knowledge, that information, and going through everything with a fine-tooth comb.
Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Jo Baxter.
Thanks. So the Equality and Human Rights Commission has stated that they've got suspicions that successive Secretaries of State may have broken equality law by failing to provide reasonable adjustments for people with health conditions. Something that I think most of us who are new to the committee were pretty shocked to learn. Can you talk to us about the steps you're taking to ensure that you're consistently meeting this obligation?
Well, let me just say I've already met with the Equality and Human Rights Commission, their chair, chief executive, head of enforcement, and the lead on the investigation. I can't, because it is an investigation going on, I can't share all the specific details about it, but I'm really absolutely engaging with them, as is the Permanent Secretary. We want to make sure, again, we resolve this in the absolute best way possible. I don't just want to keep people safe. I don't just want to be fulfilling my legal obligations. We want us to be going further. So I'm absolutely determined to resolve this and deal with all the information, deal with all the evidence. And as I said, in October, 14th of October, I've already met them, and I hope that shows my determination to resolve this.
Thank you. Neil Coyle.
So Peter, in January 23 last year, you told us that the Equality and Rights Commission were happy with negotiations and that progress was towards an agreement was being made to tackle unlawful discrimination. What progress were you talking about?
Well, back 18 months ago, we were making good progress talking about the nature of the questions that they had and how we could work together. And we were working at the time towards hopefully agreeing what's called a Section 23 legal agreement, which would have then framed the work that we were going to do together going forward. In the end, those conversations became more protracted over time, and in the end it became impossible to agree that Section 23 agreement, just in terms of the legal terms of that agreement. We weren't able to agree, sadly. The result of that, as Mr. Cole, you'll remember from the last time I was in the predecessor committee back in May, back then the Equality and Human Rights Commission had said they wanted to take us into a Section 20 investigation. And that's the situation we're in now. And those conversations, and I was at the meeting that the Secretary of State described with the Chair and Chief Executive of the HRC, those conversations have gone well in the sense that everything that the Commission have asked us to provide, we've been providing them many documents. And what we've said, and I mean, this could become, the Section 23 conversation became a rather sort of legalistic thing. I mean, the key thing for me is two things. One is absolutely, as the Secretary of State says, in terms of the culture we're trying to change in the organisation, one of openness, one of being a listening and learning organisation. Ever since I've been Permanent Secretary, back in 2019 even, we set out a service excellence plan. We put in place a number of changes, including the setting up of a serious case panel, and we published the minutes for that in further detail in our annual report and accounts. That is to identify cases where things have gone wrong or have nearly gone wrong, so we can listen and learn from them in a very open and transparent way, and lots of changes.
Yes, so Peter, the Equality and Rights Commission did choose in May to launch a formal investigation, which you have no choice over. You have to provide those documents. Mm-hmm. And you came back to this committee and said the challenge we have had all along is understanding the nature of the concerns that the HRC have. So why wasn't it a stronger priority for you as the departmental lead to ensure that the HRC didn't end up in a formal investigation and that there was an agreement reached?
Well, we worked together at a senior level to try and identify some of those issues. What I also said back in May is the value of a Section 20 investigation is it in the terms of reference set out, it is very clear exactly what it is that the Commission want to focus in on, which is in this case the nature of health assessments and reasonable adjustments around health assessments. So we're able to focus in the information that we're providing on the information that's required. But in the meantime, over the last 4 or 5 years, we've dramatically changed the way that we do health assessments anyway. So far fewer people are being asked to come in for a face-to-face health assessment for disability benefits than ever before.
Who is leading for the department with the EHRC?
The Director of Customer Experience.
And hopefully as it comes forward, more papers will come to us as well so that we can see exactly what the blocks were to your understanding of what the HRC was looking at. But I think we are short of time, so do you want me to jump on to the next question?
Please,
so the next issue is the child poverty review, and I'll come back to Secretary of State if I may. Will the child poverty review be examining the impacts of the Coalition's benefit cap and the two-child limit?
Yeah, the child poverty strategy, cross-government, will look at all of the things that cause child poverty and that crucially can get kids out of poverty. We are looking at people's incomes, that's from social security, but also work, because the only long-term way to tackle this issue is to have more people into better paid jobs. It will look at costs that we have to bring down, basic costs, whether it's housing especially, as well as energy bills. I think there's been a sort of shift since when we were last in government, where there are far more kids growing up in poverty in private rented sector than there were when we were last in government. We'll look at debt and a whole bundle of financial resilience, and then it will also look at what I see as the sort of public service bit of the jigsaw, how to give every child the best start in life, particularly around the earliest years. Those are the 4 different bits of government we will look at, but absolutely we'll look at the impact of the social security system.
And we'll definitely be covering the issues that the UN Special Rapporteur looks at, which is no recourse to public funds impact, and also sanctions within universal credit, where the government has already made a change that the Select Committee previously recommended on reducing the amount that could be removed under sanctions policy.
We'll look at everything. I mean, maybe everybody says this, but I want to be evidence-based. I am, in the end, I have my strong values, but I am, as one great man once said, what matters is what works.
And in order to be evidence-based, will the measurement and reporting of poverty be shifted back to a more accurate reflection, perhaps? Because the Coalition fiddled the figures to report not on the same measures that the previous Labour government have been doing. So.
We've had this debate in the House about this. We will be looking at relative poverty after housing costs as well as absolute poverty. I'm very concerned about deep poverty, which again is a big shift from when we were last in government. Over 800,000 children in households forced to rely on food banks, as well as these sort of more difficult to measure than in those ways, but the things that give children the best start in life. Before I became an MP, I ran a charity, the Maternity Alliance, which looked at pregnancy in the first year of life, and what would it take. Wrote a report called Equal at One. What would it take to give every child an equal start in life? So I'm very, very interested and focused on the early years of life, as is the co-chair of the Child Poverty Strategy, Bridget Phillipson. But my main point about this is it is unacceptable that over 4 million children are growing up poor, 700,000 more than when we left office. Children can't fulfil their potential when they're growing up poor, and the country cannot fulfil its potential. And one of the things I am very interested in is, if I think about all those incredible things we did to lift all those kids out of poverty, and when I became an MP in 2010, all my lovely children's centres, all just destroyed, shut, closed, right? How do we make this work? But how do we make this last? Because I want lasting change, and that is the big, big, hard thing that we need to do as a new government.
Thank you. Just a very brief one from John Milne.
Just wanted to explore your long-term thinking on the issue. Do you see that there is a place for removing the two-child limit in the future, or are you looking to solve child poverty by another means or set of measures?
Look, I'm only too well aware of the impact that it's had. I've got 1 in 3 kids growing up poor in my constituency. In 2017, way before COVID, we did a survey of all our kids and young people in Leicester, and 1 in 5 said their biggest worry was not having anything to eat every single day. Right, so I know the impact, and I know the impact it has. But again, we'll only make a promise when we know how we can keep it, how we can afford it. But long term, it is actually the original Beveridge report said this, that the social security system alone is not the thing that will deliver people the full and fulfilling lives that they deserve. That is about more better paid jobs, enough decent affordable housing, and public services that give children the very best start in life. So I'm only too well aware of the impact that policy, which we voted against, had. But there are systemic issues we also need to address, and we need to learn the lessons of what's different from when we were last in government and how we make this last.
Thank you. David Pinto-Dyszyński.
Thank you. And I'd like to touch on the thorny issue of fraud and error. So under the last government, fraud and error, the fraud rate increased significantly, rising by more than 50% since 2019 and more than 65% since 2010 to 3.7% of all benefits paid. This is costing the taxpayer a bit shy of 10 billion quid a year. Despite publishing a plan to reduce fraud in the benefit system back in May, DWP recently stated it cannot commit to substantially reducing that figure, and departmental estimates seem to suggest that you expect rates of fraud and error to remain broadly, a bit down, but broadly at that level for the next 5 years. This is just the plan outlined by the previous government isn't fit for purpose, and I'm really pleased to hear your announcement last month about the new fraud, error and debt bill. I suppose my question is, what is your approach to tackling fraud and error, and how will you overhaul the previous government's plan?
Okay, so I think it's unacceptable that £10 billion a year is being wasted on fraud. I think it's unacceptable for taxpayers. I also think it's unacceptable for the people who desperately rely on the social security system, because we should be focusing help on those who need it most. So, I mean, Peter will say more about this as well, but the budget brought forward the biggest ever package to reduce fraud and error in the system. It includes employing 3,000 more people looking at serious cases, including organised crime. We've seen, you will have seen, I hope, some examples of this, which we need to crack down on. We need to update our use of data and technology here. We always need human beings at the end of this to make decisions. It's not something, that's just done automatically. We need to use that technology, but always have a human being making the final decision about cases. We need to be able to really prevent error from happening in the first place. We cannot have a situation where people are building up debts either through fraud or through their mistakes. We really need to make sure that doesn't happen and use technology. We're starting doing that in areas like carers allowance, because by texting people when they're getting close to the threshold, we need to really overhaul and update our tech systems here. We need to I think we need to update our powers. We haven't had them updated for 20 years. If we need to gather information, for example, from airlines because of abroad fraud or organised crime, we should be able to get that. That's really important. So it's a whole package of measures that we need to put in place with the right safeguards, with independent oversight, and that they're proportionate, but that is what we will be doing in this bill.
Fantastic. Just to add to that, I mean, we know the things that work. We've been trying them out. What this budget has done is given a massive investment in that activity to drive it out. It's about detecting the fraud that's already in the system, and quite a lot of fraud came into universal credit through the pandemic. Because we couldn't do so, because of social distancing, meant some of those face-to-face controls we were unable to deploy. And we've been rooting that out, but we can go further in rooting that out and rooting that out faster. Addressing situations where someone's claim was right when they made the claim, but circumstances have changed and they haven't told us about that, so the claim is no longer right. So it enables us to re-verify claims on a regular basis as well. And the other thing I would say is it is just as important to me as accounting officer to make sure that we're addressing issues around underpayments as it is around overpayments. And underpayments is also an issue, particularly around some of the disability benefits. Well, I'm glad to say the OBR has reviewed the range of measures that were announced in the budget, and their latest forecast that they've published will suggest that certainly in universal credit, fraud and error will be, by the end of the scorecard period, will be below where it was at the beginning of the pandemic. So that is a sign of, the forecasts are moving in the right direction, just to address where you started in your question. But we've got to now deliver this and relentlessly drive this and deliver this. Drive down overpayments, particularly fraud, but also address issues around underpayment.
Fantastic. And how are you drawing on best practice from the private sector? Clearly, DWP is at the forefront of this, but many other sectors, including banking, insurance, lots of other people, are seeing similar things.
Yeah, I mean, we work well with there's a public sector fraud authority working across government that also draws in expertise from the private sector. But, for example, the way that we're delivering the targeted case review in universal credit, part of that is being delivered in-house and part of that is being delivered by outsourced providers who are doing a lot of the initial work to help us identify the cases. They don't then, it's our own people who follow that up and make decisions, but enables us to learn from other ways, other techniques. A lot of this is around using data in different ways, as well as accessing the data when we don't have access to it already, and being able to analyse that data and be able to be ahead of the curve. So transaction risking is well advanced in many of the financial services industries, and we're keen to learn from that and keen to do this in a different way. But really, I mean, the key point to get across to the committee is a real intention to put more oomph behind this than ever before, for exactly the reasons that the Secretary of State has described. We want the money to go to the people it is intended to go to, and not to the people it's not intended to go to.
Fantastic. And just one final question on that, if I may, very briefly. Thank you. That sounds really helpful. How do you envisage that will affect the kind of customer journey that people have? Do you think, is that something that will change the way benefits are claimed, or is it something that can happen behind the curtain, so to speak?
Ideally behind the curtain. I mean, where we've tried this out, and it's been quite effective, is advances in universal credit, where the transaction risking enables us to identify through the claim process very quickly if there's something about the claim that makes it suspicious, and we feed it off for a particular investigation. But that rarely, I think, holds up the delivery of the advances, and certainly for genuine customers, those advances are pretty seamless through the process.
Thank you.
Okay. Can I just ask if you could possibly write to Secretary of State about when you envisage the bill to, because it wasn't included in the King's speech, when it might be you expect it to come to pass?
I mean, I will always write to you. I mean, as soon as we can, we will let you know the timetable for that.
Thank you.
Is that all right?
And a very brief one now from Peter Bedford.
Thank you, Chair. Following up on the points that David made, I mean, I welcome the use of AI and technology to identify fraud. I worked as an auditor in the private sector, so absolutely appreciate the use of technology to identify. I just want to dig a little bit further into ensuring that the department will be targeting those frauds that are systemic and individuals that perhaps have made mistakes. You know, the forms are complicated. You mentioned earlier about the complication of forms. You mentioned about vulnerable claimants. To ensure the department is focusing on those frauds that are systemic rather than individual cases.
It's so important because that's so important. The things what I would say the real changes from the previous government's approach is, number one, we want a very, very clear on the bill, a code of practice on the face of the bill. Secondly, that we want independent oversight of what's happening to make sure what we're doing is right and fair and proportionate with reporting to Parliament. And we want the legislation to be really absolutely as clearly defined as possible. Because, look, I think for everybody that is rightly outraged at £10 billion a year going on fraud, when you think of how desperately some people that need that money, at the same time as what's happened with carers allowance and people just going above the threshold and building up debt and then being terrified and worried, and we have to get this right. And that is partly about trying to make the legislation as properly defined with the right oversight as possible, and Peter and I have had many conversations about this to make sure what we're doing is proportionate with the right oversight, but also about preventing this happening in the first place, particularly for people who just going a bit over on their savings or whatever it is, that we find a way. I mean, I'm, thank goodness now, alerted all the time when I've got an NHS appointment, about 5 times, so I don't forget it. I seem to be rung every single day by energy companies telling me to go onto a smart meter. We at the worst possible times, probably even about to happen now, but we've got to find ways of sharing that data, keeping privacy, but sharing that data so people are alerted. But it is also the case, we can't have a situation where our powers haven't been updated for 20 years, where we don't have the same powers as HMRC or even the Child Maintenance Service, where organised criminals are fleecing the system, and where people who are busting a gut and going out and working hard worry about £10 billion on fraud and debt in the system. So we've got to get this right, and we are determined to do that with all the right. But you will probably scrutinise us on that and give us more information and advice, ideas from the private sector, ideas. You know, I am definitely open to ideas, so please, you know, that would be good.
Fantastic. Jo Baxter.
Thank you. Can you talk to us about the discussions that you've had with the devolved administrations about the benefits delivered by DWP in Scotland and Wales?
Yes, I have met with all the devolved, virtually met with all the devolved administrations about working together. We've had a really very clear signal from the Prime Minister all the way down that we need to build a good working relationship with the devolved administrations. There have been challenges along the way, including over winter fuel. And I understand that, and we're working through. I think officials have good relationships. We've gone further, obviously, in Scotland with devolved benefits, and Peter may want to say something more about that, but we want a good, strong relationship to work through any issues, to give as much as is humanly and politically possible advance information about all the things we're doing, whether it's Get Britain Working or the fraud, error and debt bill, or any changes that we make. That's something I'm committed to doing.
Shall I build on that, just in terms of how it works at official level?
Yeah.
Because there's a big programme of work that's done collaboratively between DWP and the Scottish Government, which I review with John Paul Marks on an annual basis. In fact, I'm up in Scotland next week for the latest of those meetings. And what we've been doing over a number of years is going through a number of phases of the devolution of benefits to Scotland. And the latest is, as I said, around the disability benefits. And I think the plan is to have got to a point where existing cases of PIP and attendance allowance will have been migrated to the Scottish Social Security Agency by, I think it's next March. I think we're on track for that, but I'll be reviewing that with JP Marks next week.
So, conscious, obviously, that those agency agreements exist in terms of the DWP continuing to administer some of the benefits that have been devolved to the Scottish Government. Is there a cost to the Department of staff working on the administration of those benefits that have already been devolved when they could be undertaking other work?
Yeah, I mean, it's fully. I mean, there's a costing arrangement. It's funded by the Scottish Government. But I mean, we're happy to play our part because, I mean, the key thing for us is to make sure that it's a seamless transition for the people of Scotland as those benefits get devolved. And there'll be executive competence that might move ahead of the ability of the Social Security Agency, which is obviously has been growing and building its capacity over time and doing that, I think, rather successfully. But as it's ready to take those benefits on to deliver, then those agency agreements come to an end. And we've been flexible with them about when we're ready, or whenever they're ready to take the delivery, we're ready to do that. And in the meantime, we're running the agency agreements on behalf of them, on behalf of the people of Scotland.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jill German.
Thank you. So we've talked about this already. It's come up naturally in discussion about devolving employment support to local areas. So the previous committee actually recommended that happened, but the government of the time they expressed worry that it wouldn't be value for money and that economies of scale would be lost, which I find extraordinary because in my own area the local authority has actually put in employment support to underpin what was happening at a national level that then used grant funds that could be used elsewhere. So it seems curious to me. I wondered what your thoughts on that were, and also the learning that will happen from organisations such as Work in Denbighshire in my area, of things that are already in place, and that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, I suppose, that we build on things that have been organically put together already.
I mean, I'm a strong champion of devolution, not for its own sake, but because of better results for people. Because, you know, in Leicester, sorry, you'll hear me talking a lot about Leicester, but it's like my job. My challenge is around economic inactivity. The biggest reason people give is caring for a family member. Often multi-generational households, real issues there, whereas other parts of the country is much more about long-term physical health problems or mental health problems. And therefore, what works in what we need in Leicester isn't going to be the same. I mean, some things are the same, but they often differ. And therefore, I genuinely think, and we also know all of the different vol-orgs and colleges and all. So I see employment support, future employment support, very much co-designed with local leaders and local areas. I think that's really, really important. And for the rollout of what was called universal support, but what we will call Connect to Work, we want to see that as part of the integrated settlements in Greater Manchester and the West Midlands, like the glue. It's going to be like the glue that helps partly bring things together, enhance them. I want to see local areas play more of a role in designing our new jobs and careers service. So I think there's much more we can do. You'll hear more in our devolution bill when it comes out, more in our Get Britain Working white paper, but I want to see as much support as possible pushed down locally, because I think that will deliver better results.
What we found locally was that what was missing was a way to get people close to the workplace and keep them in work, which I know that you've touched on as well. So will that be part of the new package?
So I think there is we call it a sort of, well, there's two things. We can't have 300,000 people every year falling out of work. I mean, at least you've got to start dealing with that early intervention, really in work, and you've got to basically within that first year pile in support. But we also know, this is really interesting from a visit I did actually last Friday to my local hospital that's done it's a year-long supported internship programme for young people with special educational needs and learning disabilities, and it was a year-long programme. 100% of them was then offered a paid job by the hospital. It's so successful, they've rolled it out to the university and one of the bigger hotel chains in the city. But it started with a personal assistant who had to actually get on the bus with them to get them to work. Absolutely. Literally, that's where we've got... Now, all of this stuff about you've got to get any job now, tomorrow. Guys, look, focus. It is a journey, it is a pathway. And that isn't because we're not ambitious about giving people the right and the choice to work. It's that we know the steps you need to get there. So that is that is our new approach. And it's really inspiring, actually. It's really inspiring.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just one final one from me. Thank you very much for your response to the defined benefit pensions report that the previous committee undertook. You'll be aware that the committee thought the policy of not providing indexation of pre-1997 benefits for members of the Pension Protection Fund and Financial Assistance Scheme should be revisited as a matter of urgency. And I know your letter said you will be doing that, but do you have an indication of a timescale again?
What I would do is, if that's okay, is ask Emma Reynolds, Minister for Pensions, to write to you, just looking at officials, if that's okay, as soon as possible.
Thank you. Secretary of State, Permanent Secretary, thank you so much for all your time today and your very thorough answering of our questions. Thank you. Order,
Pleasure.
order.